Hey, hey, hey. What's going on, good people? Hopefully, y'all doing all right out there in the world. I have my mic um, input settings all the way up. So, hopefully, y'all can hear me. I'm trying to do something new with the mic as far as where it's placed. I put it a little lower, as you can see. Looks like the stand is going to hold up. But I hope that y'all can hear me. This way, you can see my whole face, right? I'll be looking I'll be looking good for these podcasts. um, please like the video. I'll give you a nice big hug. Please like the video. Please subscribe to the channels. I do want to monetize this podcast, and I cannot do so if I don't qualify. And right now, I don't qualify, so I need subscribers and likes and view. What do they call watching hours or something like that. If you are here, okay, this is the Inner Storyteller podcast. My name is Soul Expression, and I remain your humblest of hosts. Um, the Inner Storyteller is a super duper great philosophy that I like to spew on my channel. I spew my philosophies. I feel like the mic sank a little bit. I'm gonna put it right there, let it lean, and then right there, let that lean. There we go. If you are here, good people, then you are in for real conversations. Okay. We talk about natural law. We talk about religion. We talk about money, anarchy, culture, and how mankind is manipulated by forces that do not have our best interests at heart, possibly because they are completely evil forces. And although we do, talk a great deal about religion in a way that I kind of steer people away from blind faith in religion. We do not bash faith systems here, and we do not assume that I am right on this channel. We are simply examining the psychological affects and effects of the stories that we have the most faith in, the ones we have the most stake in. And that examination sits right alongside an honest look at the current human condition, which is slavery. Government is slavery, no matter how you slice it. And the question we have to keep coming back to is what can actually be improved with a proper understanding of the inner storyteller and how it works. And if any of that makes you a little uneasy, makes you a little angry, or uncomfortable in any way, please be assured and reassured, good people, although you are 1000% encouraged to stay and confront those feelings, you are indeed welcome to leave. Today, we are taking a look at why facts spoken without moral causality are just noise. Okay? Just noise. Noise. my daughter, my daughter likes saying noise. Facts spoken without moral causality are just noise. They don't amount to much more than filler brain food, right? So let's get into it. I want to start with a question that may sound a little simple, but isn't. My question is, and let me make myself a little bit bigger here. There we go. Question is, why does history keep producing the same kinds of tragedy? Hmm? Why is not the same events? The specific names, dates, weapons, and actors always change, but the pattern, you know, empire, extraction, atrocity, collapse, and repeat. That pattern is so consistent across so many different eras, languages, cultures, and civilizations that even the mainstream media has a phrase for it. They say history repeats itself, right? And they tell you why. They say history repeats itself because we don't study it hard enough. We don't understand it deep enough because we don't know the names and dates well enough and the sequences of events. Because if we'd had just paid a little closer attention to the specific details of what happened before, we would recognize it faster. And when it starts happening again, we'd react in time the right way to stop it. I want to challenge that explanation, and I want to do so directly. Not because studying history is wrong. Of course not. Studying history is paramount. But because studying history for facts alone, meaning without moral causality, is not studying history at all, good people. It is cataloging a chronology given to you in incomplete form by people who claim the right to what information is given to you. And chronology without conscience is just trivia without context or purpose. What we were taught history is for. Think about how history was taught to you in school, right? And even like in a lot of books. You get the names, you get the dates, you get the causes listed in like textbook bullet points, sometimes the result, the consequences. And you get a test at the end measured that measures whether you could reproduce the information on demand or not, and like how well you can reproduce the information on demand. The content was presented as settled, true, complete. Here's what happened. Here are the people involved. Here are the. One moment. My microphone is indeed syncing. I wonder if I can see it. Can I see it syncing on camera? No, it's too slow. I want to fix my mic. Hold on. Okay. That should be tight enough on the thing. Don't fail me now, Mike. Mic holder thing. Don't fail me now. So, again, in school, the emphasis is on here's what happened, here are the people involved, here were the consequences. The examination never asked what the moral weight had been accumulating in the collective of the civilization, like their choices, the moral weight of the choices accumulating in the civilization before the event in history was recorded, before the tragedy happened. What was the collective inner storyteller of the civilization or civilizations writing into the minds of the people at the time? It never asked because that question cannot be answered in multiple choice format. That question requires moral understanding. And moral reasoning, objective moral reasoning grounded in natural law, was the one thing that the factory model curriculum was specifically designed not to produce in government school. We were conditioned through the way the stories are designed to study history for facts alone, to leave objective morality aside, to analyze the what and the who and the when without seriously examining the moral weight of a civilization's accumulated choices and how they may have affected or, in some cases, directly produced, because natural law is constant, in some cases, produced the consequences that followed the tragedy. And until natural law, specifically its karmic component, as it relates to human freedom, is incorporated into that analysis, good people, we remain in near total darkness about why repetition, similarity dominate human tragic history, regardless of how many facts we accumulate about these tragedies. So, what does moral causality actually mean? What are we getting at here? Let's be precise. Let's be precise about what I mean by moral causality, because it's not mysticism. It's not ritualized mysticism, and it's not religion in the way most people use that word. Natural law operates through cause and effect. What you put out comes back in proportion to the moral weight of the situation. Not as divine punishment, by the way, not as a cosmic reward, but as the observable, consistent mechanical operation of a universe governed by principles that do not change based on who's in office or what century it is, right? Karma in the natural law sense, not the social media sense necessarily, is the accumulated moral weight of the choices made over time, producing the consequences proportional to that weight of individuals and groups. The specific form of the consequence always changes, right? The specific form of the petal as the flower blooms, it's not this, you don't get two exactly identical petals, right? The exact form changes. The mechanism producing the consequences does not change. So, when you study a war, any war, and you and you catalog the specific trigger, the specific actors, the specific weapons, or the specific body count, you have the symptoms. What you don't have is the disease or the root. The disease is the story that was running in the collective inner storyteller of the civilization that produced the war. And that is the point that we miss when we study history for facts alone. The base story that made the tragedy, the war, the genocide, the manifest destiny land settlement, the slavery, feel not just possible, but necessary for too many in the human family population. That made the people who carried it out feel righteous, not just willing, but righteous in what they were doing. And that story is in virtually every major historical tragedy is the same one that we have been examining on this channel for months and months. More power is always good for the one who holds it. That's the story, right? That story produces predictable consequences, and it always has. Not because history repeats itself, it doesn't, okay? Not in its specific form, but because the same base story running in the collective inner storyteller of a civilization produces the same moral weight and therefore the same category of moral consequences to the civilization of pick a century, pick a region, pick a language, pick a culture, pick a two, pick a group, pick a couple groups, right? The point is facts spoken without moral causality are just noise, right? So, this obviously brings me into the true nature of the human being. And we've talked about this on this channel, and I often shout out Mark Passio's work. Uh, I agree with Mark Passio's assessment, along with other researchers. There's nothing new under the sun, right? I'm not doing this podcast to bring to you only original ideas or something like that, you know. But I agree with Mark, and so I'm going to speak, from my own voice. But I like cognized and assimilated and started to implement this understanding and studied this mainly through the rhetoric lens, whatever that I got from Mark Passio, because I think he hit the nail right on the head. I think everything he said made sense as far as my lived experience. So, true nature of the human being. Let's get into it. The standard response to the human nature argument, when you tell people that the same stories keep producing the same outcomes, is to basically shrug and say, well, that's because it's human nature, right? That's because human nature is inherently selfish, is the sentiment that a lot of people come with. And that response should be examined directly. Now, I don't believe that we are fundamentally good, just as I don't believe we are fundamentally bad or selfish. I don't believe we are neutral fundamentally either, in the sense of like a blank slate waiting to be passively shaped and molded and moved around. I don't think morally we're neutral either. I, as well as a lot of people in the freedom community, say human beings, human conscience is programmable, right? Not as a metaphor only, but as a precise description of what human beings actually are in the mental space. Like a computer, we're programmable. Like a computer whose outputs and defects are best understood by examining its programming, its file system format, its hardware, and its software. A human being's patterns of behavior or output as an adult are best understood by examining what was written into their temple, their system, their being during their formative years, their first years on earth, when the programming, um, like file system format was being formed, was being built. For example, in India, the Jains exist, right? The Jains are a culture that has maintained a super duper deep nonviolence across generations, extending their circle of moral concern to insects and the ground they walk on, this very specific plants that they eat. A lot of Jains are strict vegans, some are vegetarian. They are evidence that human beings are capable of extraordinary moral development when an environment is deliberately structured to produce it. On the contrary, child soldiers exist in the same world. Children who, by puberty, sometimes before, have participated in atrocities because the environment that they were born into made violence a condition of survival, and they are thereby evidence of the same capacity in the opposite direction. Same capacity for good or bad based on the programming. The part that we often miss is that your choices are also you programming yourself, right? So the same species with radically different programming produces radically different outputs of behavior on the screen called life. We are like a computer. This resolves the human nature debate without requiring either the cynical position that we're just all selfish or the naive position that we're just all really good and we're all good on the inside. If we look deep enough, we have a good nature. It's very naive, in my opinion. The observable range of human behavior, from the Janes to the child soldiers and everything in between, can't really be explained by a fixed nature, good or bad or neutral, morally neutral. We are like a computer, neutral in in the holistic sense, but we're not morally just inherently morally neutral. And then evil or good or some combination gets imposed onto the neutrality. That's not what happens, in my opinion. Right? So the range of human behavior can't really be explained by a fixed nature. It can only really be explained by a programmable nature. And what that means for the history question is very significant. Civilizations don't repeat tragedies because human beings are inherently violent or inherently stupid or selfish. They repeat it because the same stories, the same base stories, keep getting written to new generations before those generations are old enough to really examine or choose them for themselves. The program runs, the output follows. The historian catalogs the outputs and calls it human nature. Or the historian just catalogs the outputs and the person on the news calls it human nature. The person in the philosophy class calls it human nature. The moral causality analysis goes looking for the program. What was installed? What was the environment of the children that later became the adults? You know, that's what doing the inner storyteller work consists of. What's the root? How's my mic doing? Doing all right. It actually shifted a bunch. I don't know if y'all can tell, but it shifted. I can see it. I can see it shifted. Now, let's go a little deeper on the like a computer anal- uh, uh, analogy. Analogy. I was gonna say analogous comparison, but then I was like, it's still too much. The formative years and the default operating system. The formative years are the primary programming window. It's the time in which the main keys to understanding your adult outputs lie in this window. And this is supported by neuroscience, developmental psychology, and by the inner storyteller framework simultaneously from three different directions. First of all, the brain's plasticity is the highest, the earliest. The younger you are, the more plastic and mendable and moldable your brain is. The sorting function, the mechanism by which the inner storyteller categorizes incoming information before conscious examination can occur, is being built before the child has any capacity to evaluate what is being installed. Okay? The sorting function. It operates at the speed of thought, which is exponentially faster than the speed of light because thought does not travel through anything. Thought appears instantaneously. Interpretation is also in thought form. And so I don't want you to confuse the sorting function with that inner voice that interprets how you think about something or what you think about something. I'm talking about the wordless initial understanding is, that sorting association mechanism, if you will. That happens and it's wordless and it's super fast and you sort of only know it by reflection or looking at the effect of it and reflecting on that. Similar to you only know air exists by looking at and reflecting on its effects, right? So the brain's the brain's plasticity is highest earliest. The sorting function, which is the mechanism by which the inner storyteller categorizes incoming information before conscious examination can occur, is being built before the child has any capacity to evaluate what is being installed. The files written in those years do not just disappear when the child grows up and hears something new. They actually become largely the default operating system that everything subsequent runs on top of, which means the adult who cannot examine why they comply, why they defer, why they abdicate responsibility, why they feel anxious without external authoritative structure, why they defend systems that are actively harming human beings and themselves. That adult is not just weak or stupid by itself, right? They might be a little weak, they might be a little stupid, but they're not just weak and stupid. They are running the default operating system they were given by the environment, meaning the story form environment, the inner environment, which programmed their operating system before they could understand what was happening. The programming is doing what the programming does. A computer with corrupted files is not evil, it's running bad code. Similarly, a human being with corrupted behavior is not merely evil. They may be evil. Their behavior may be evil, but it's not merely evil. They are running bad code. Bad programming went in there somehow, some way. Sometimes bad programming feels genetic in like type 1 psychopaths. Type 1 meaning you were kind of born with it. You showed signs of it from birth and you had no environmental factors going into that we could discover. right? But you can't really empathize and stuff like that. Type 1 psychopaths. Oh, I got 2 viewers. Hi, viewers. Hopefully, y'all doing well. It's not that they're just evil by itself, right? They're running bad code. The question is not what is wrong with you. The question is what was written into your system before you could read it. And what do you want to write now that you can? That is the inner storyteller work, not just as like some sort of self help mentalization process, but as moral archaeology. You got to dig into yourself. Go pause. Going back, going back through the default operating system and asking honestly, did I choose this, or was it installed before I had the tools to ask? And what it comes down to is the fact that our choices bear fruit. So let's talk about the standard of which we judge. Hmm? Here is how you're supposed to evaluate the answers to the questions without requiring any external authority to validate what you find. You look at the fruit, not intentions, not your self report, not your religious category or your political alignment, not your credentials, the fruit, the direction your choices have actually been heading toward, and what they've actually produced for yourself, for the people around you, for the greater community, for the world that you leave your children and your nieces, nephews, cousins, friends, and friends' kids. Okay? That is the natural law standard for moral inventory. And it's observable, testable, honest. It requires no institution to administer it, and it doesn't require any word magic rhetoric expertise to understand. The fruit either confirms that the story running your life is aligned with what you say you value, or it doesn't. And the gap between what you say you value and what your choices are actually producing is the most precise measurement available of how much of your operating system is still running the default programming rather than the one you consciously choose. This is simpler than religion makes it, right? But it's also harder than a lot of self help material pretends it is. It's simple because the standard is observable. What are the fruits? What direction do your choices lead yourself and the rest of the people around you? Do you need a priest or a pastor or a life coach to tell you whether or not the fruit of your choices moves your life and the lives of those around you toward flourishing and thriving or not? No, you can see it and you can understand it without being taught how to. You already know. But it's also hard, difficult, because seeing it requires you to look at the gap between the story you tell yourself and the story your choices are telling. And the default operating system, which includes this ego you've built up, the one installed in your formative years, right? Reinforced by compulsory schooling, government school, 12 years at least, saturated by manufactured culture and engineered media and, you know, contracts, The default operating system has a strong interest in keeping that gap invisible. The ego does defend itself. What this means for how we study history. So, what would it take? What would it look like to study history holistically with moral causality incorporated? Well, it would mean that every historical event is examined not just for what happened, but for what story was running in the collective inner storyteller of the civilization that produced it. What did the civilization reward? What did it punish? Right? What did it call virtue? What did it call righteous? What did it call weakness? What did it call strength? What moral weight was accumulating in the field, conscious, alive awareness through the choices of the leaders, of the compliant populations, of the rebel populations, through the stories being told to children about what the world was and who they were in it before the event that history recorded as the tragedy took place. Right? It would mean that the question is not just who started the war, right? But instead, what story made the war feel inevitable to the people who orchestrated it and a lot of the people who fought in it? Not just who built the system of extraction, but what story made people being extracted from accept the extraction as natural or even necessary or simply the way things are, right? It would mean teaching children from the earliest ages that their choices carry moral weight, not just as a religion, of course, but natural law observation lessons, right? That the direction your decisions are heading matters for everyone in the world. The story you are running matters for everyone in the world. That the mind is programmable, and therefore you are responsible for examining your programming, right? Rather than just simply that's the way I am to everything. That's the curriculum that the factory model was specifically designed to fight against, you know. But you know, a population that understands moral causality is not a population that they can control. A population that can trace the connection between tragic historical events and the stories that a civilization is running is a population that cannot be managed through the same base stories that they use to manage populations right now and have been for millennia, definitely centuries. Uh, facts, facts spoken without moral causality are just noise, good people. Chronology without conscience is just trivia with no context or purpose. The history that matters is not a catalog of what happened and what are the names and what are the dates. It's in its holistic form, the honest examination of the stories that produced the behaviors and whether we are still running the same stories right now, which leads me always to the question I like to ask at the end of these episodes. What story are you willing to live? This was good. This was a good one, good people. Please like the video. Please subscribe to the channels. Today is Friday, so I will see you tomorrow, probably a little bit earlier in the day. Um, Thank you so much for being here. Um, Man, I left that last comment up for a long time because I forgot it was up there. But yeah, man, you gonna see me tomorrow. Make sure you go back a couple episodes and check out the interview I did with John Bush. Very powerful stuff. Check out all the interviews. All the interviews are like super dope content. I always feel a nice little energetic high after doing an interview with somebody. But we got another banger for you tomorrow. Tune in, subscribe, like, comment, 6 words, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace and love. Oh, and hit the link tree right here. Hit the link tree. Okay. See what we have for June. And I'll see you later.